What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, January 13th, Friday the 13th. Trishkadekaphobics Unite. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about on the show today, and I apologize for my voice. I'm a little bit under the weather, but we're going to just power on through here. The Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room twiddling the dials and keeping us out of trouble. Now then, again, it's Friday the 13th, which is considered unlucky, although my own personal history is good things tend to happen to me on Friday the 13th, but it's considered bad luck, and that goes all the way back to Friday the 13th of October in 1307, which is when all the Knights Templars were rounded up by King Philip the Fair and the Pope, primarily because King Philip the Fair had gotten too deeply into debt with the Templars to be able to bail his way out, and this was his way of dealing with that unpayable debt, which, I don't know, looking at the Federal Reserve and the IMF and the ECB and the World Bank, maybe Philip the Fair wasn't totally out of line in terms of how to deal with banker-manufactured debt enslavement here. Interestingly enough, the Grand Master of the Templars, Jacques de Molay, the popular notion is that he was burned at the stake, and that's not true. He was actually roasted. They held him above the flames to prolong the agony. And there is one theory that the Shroud of Turin, which actually bears quite a resemblance to de Molay himself, was a hoax perpetrated by surviving Templars to embarrass the church. But at the time, the Pope said, no, this is a fake. We're not buying into this whole thing. Interestingly enough, the Vatican recently discovered a record of the trial of the Templars written by Pope Clement, which ends with a papal absolution from all heresies. So the Pope, even after all the torture and the burning and the roasting and all the rest of it, the Pope said, hey, they didn't really do anything here. All right, getting into the modern world, the desperation by the establishment to get rid of incoming President Donald Trump, which happens a week from today, we've got 1 week to go, it's desperation on the cusp of madness. And there was this article that was over at the Duran.com about how Vice President Mike Pence could stage a perfectly legal palace coup by invoking Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which says that whenever the Vice President and a majority of the principal officers of the executive departments, meaning the Cabinet, transmit to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. And there's a mechanism by which the President can come back and say, I'm perfectly okay, but that throws it into Congress, which can literally vote the President out on that 25th Amendment with a two-thirds majority. Now, obviously, all the Democrats are going to vote against Trump, and that leaves only a small number of Republicans who would have to be bribed to do this. But this sounds like another Hail Mary, desperate, long shot, like the riots after the election, the death threats on the Electoral College, the attempt to derail Congress' acceptance of the electoral votes, and I don't really see that this is going to go anywhere, and I don't even really see Mike Pence being willing to go along with that either. Now, we're still concerned, obviously, about riots and disruptions in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day, and there's a very alarming story just surfaced from governmentslaves.info. It seems that the commanding general of the National Guard in Washington, D.C., is to leave his post at the same moment Trump is sworn in as president. Now, this reminds me very much of all the way back during the Bill Clinton administration, when Vincent Foster was murdered on the very same day the head of the FBI was changed. Now, if the commanding general of the National Guard is out of his office, I'm sure there's going to be a command structure still there, but it's not going to be formed, it's not going to be trained up, and it looks to me like this is a move that is designed to allow civil disorder and rioting to get out of control. Now, there's no such thing as former. CIA asset John Schindler, posting on Twitter, said that the CIA is trying to take out President-elect Donald Trump before he's sworn in as president next Friday. And they're still coming on out with this latest dodge, which is Donald Trump is a Russian stooge. Donald Trump is a Russian stooge. We only allow Israeli stooges into this government. Now, interestingly enough, Donald Trump is beginning to get an up-close and personal look at all these various intelligence agencies, and he pulled a fast one on them. Remember that whole thing about the daily briefing, the intelligence briefing, and there was a thing about how Trump didn't want to get it every single day. And the problem that Trump was having is that every time he had a meeting with these briefers from the intelligence agencies, it would immediately leak out to the press. This was said, that was said, some of it's classified information. So Trump decided to conduct his own sting operation, and he agreed to an intelligence briefing, but he didn't tell anybody else except the intelligence agencies. His office staff didn't know. His security staff didn't know. All they know is everybody showed up, close the doors and come on out, and it's still leaked, meaning it is these intelligence agency briefers who have been running to the media with all of this information, some of which is actually classified. Basically, Trump pulled a sting on the nation's spook agencies. We're going to take a moment here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, everyone's screaming about how Russia was trying to help Donald Trump and harm Hillary Clinton. What a big, horrible thing. But it's actually come on out, and this was in Politico, that Ukraine was definitely involved in the U.S. election against Donald Trump and in trying to help Hillary Clinton. And apparently Ukraine disseminated documents implicating a top Trump aide in corruption. And they were investigating the matter, and then after the election it simply disappeared. They just made it up again. And they helped Clinton's allies research damaging information on Trump and his advisors. I wonder if it was Ukraine that started that story that Trump staffer Michael Cohen met with a Russian representative, except that they got the wrong guy. There were two Michael Cohens. So if it's bad for Russia to be tinkering with the election in favor of Donald Trump, which nobody can actually prove they did, why is it okay for Ukraine, or for that matter Israel, to tamper with our elections and politics all the time, which we know they do? Now, one of the stories that was circulating around by the intelligence agencies was that Donald Trump had been briefed. He'd gotten the 2-page summary of this report about Golden Shower Gate, or whatever we're going to call it, about the two prostitutes in the hotel. Now they've backed off from that. The suspicion was that they were trying to drive a wedge between Trump and Putin as firmly as possible. But now the intelligence director is saying, no, that there never was such a briefing with Donald Trump. We didn't present any of that information to him at all. They want all of this to go away because it's hugely embarrassing. Now, Jason Chaffetz is discussing a new Hillary Clinton email investigation under Donald Trump, and basically saying it's going to be a do-over. Without the interference from Loretta Lynch, without the interference from the White House itself, they're basically going to start a brand new independent investigation that starts from scratch. And boy, oh boy, would I like to be in a position to feed them some information and questions. Mostly questions. Was Hillary Clinton repeating the Clintons' 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling U.S. secrets to foreign governments, using that weak email server of hers, and using the Clinton Foundation to collect and launder the money? It's a reasonable question. Nobody wants to ask it. Nobody wants to talk about it. I hope Jason Chaffetz talks about it, because we need to know here. Now, basically, Donald Trump is fighting back against Hillary Clinton, saying if you're talking about Russian hacking or any hacking at all, you've got to look at Hillary Clinton, who basically left all the nation's secrets on this wide open server that we know was in fact hacked to by foreign powers. And so this is not going away. Remember before the election where they were trying to say that Donald Trump is not going to investigate Hillary Clinton? And that's not what he said. They were putting words, the corporate media was putting words in his mouth yet again. What he said was he wasn't out after personal revenge, but that's a far cry from saying that he was going to use his presidential authority to obstruct justice and stop a proper and legal and necessary investigation, and that's what's going on. Now, over at the corporate media, they're tearing their hair on out. There's all kinds of cartoons coming on out, just making fun of the old fossil corporate media and their inability to evolve and adapt to the new reality of a better informed, more skeptical audience that has the technology to go on out and double check what the corporate media is saying. So Jake Tapper and Wolf Blitzer are out there trying to defend CNN and say, we're not the fake news, the independent media, they're the fake news, we're the real news, you've got to watch us. Howard Kurtz came on out with the declaration, it's bad for the country when the press loses the moral authority to mediate disputes, which is media speak for it's up to the corporate media to tell you who's right, who's wrong, who's telling the truth, who's lying, what to believe and what not to believe. Well, there's no moral authority there when you're looking at the track record of the corporate media. And what Kurtz is really saying, it's bad for the elites when people stop relying on the corporate media to mediate disputes. It's bad for the corporate media itself, which has paid huge sums of money to steer public opinion a certain direction. He's absolutely right about that. Now, Ari Fleischer is out there bemoaning the fact that as of right now, all of corporate media is seen on the same level as BuzzFeed. And there may be merits to that. Sean Hannity came on out and said BuzzFeed is basically a propaganda arm of the Democratic Party, and that certainly was true, but so too was all the corporate media. The entire corporate media was shilling for Hillary Clinton and working against Donald Trump the entire campaign last year. They were not objective. They were not unbiased. They didn't really report and let you decide. It was all spin. Article coming out of, I need to see where that is. Well, I'll have to look at it later. Anyway, the most important point to keep in mind about the Russians did it three-way circus. Even going beyond the fact that there's actually no proof whatsoever, the intelligence agencies are saying, we can't show you the proof, you'll just have to take our word for it. No, we won't. No, we won't. But there's nothing there. This is a repeat of Joseph McCarthy back in the 1950s waving around fistfuls of blank paper claiming they were lists of Russian spies. Now, Guccifer 2.0, the second Romanian hacker, has gone public basically saying the intelligence community's evidence for Russia hacking is completely fake. And it is. John McAfee is out there saying the hack, if it was really a hack, and they were able to find evidence pointing at Russia, proves Russia didn't do it because Russia is good enough to know how to get into people's computers without leaving a track back. Remember, Russia is the home of Kaspersky, one of the top computer security companies in the world. They know what they're doing when it comes to malware. I'm starting to think that the reason the Department of Homeland Security was caught hacking into various election databases across the country was to plant evidence framing Russia. And they got caught and they got blocked here. And they're still out there trying to push this Russia's breaking into our system. Apparently, the public service channel C-SPAN was covering proceedings of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and all of a sudden, right when Maxine Waters was midway through a speech about SEC regulation, the programming on the channel suddenly flipped over to Russian state channel RT for about 10 minutes. Oh, the Russians are breaking into C-SPAN now. I seriously doubt it. I think somebody did that so they could scream Russian hacking, and maybe there was something being said by Maxine Waters they didn't want the public to hear. Now, Christopher Steele is out there still trying to say that this dossier that he assembled about Donald Trump and the prostitutes and the bed in the presidential suite of the Moscow Hotel is true, is true, is true. Now, everybody said, show us the proof, and he doesn't have it. So what he's doing now is he's rounding up other spies who are coming forward and saying, oh, yes, Christopher is right. I heard exactly the same thing here. And we all know what trustworthy, stand-up, honorable people spies are. They would never, ever lie to us about something as important as, for example, the Bay of Pigs, right? Now, this Steele is turning out to be a bit of a case here. Yesterday we were talking about how he was hired to try and do spin doctoring on those videos that were released, Planned Parenthood selling baby parts. And apparently he was friends, if you can call it that, with former Russian spy Alexander Litvinenko, who died of polonium radiation poisoning, a very terrible way to go. And, of course, everybody said, oh, yeah, had to be Putin, had to be Putin. I don't know. I'm starting to wonder about Christopher Steele, and maybe does he glow in the dark just a little tiny bit. Now, the BBC has announced they are setting up a team to debunk fake news. They're going to be the authoritative voice on what's real and what isn't. And I find this laughable coming from the same network that on 9/11 reported the collapse of World Trade Center 7 20 minutes before it actually happened. And I find it equally laughable that they're going to tell us what is real and fake news, given the BBC's long history of covering up the sexual predators in their employ. I mean, they're raising on a busted flesh here. They're discredited, and yet they're out there saying, well, we're going to set it up so we tell you what the real news is. No, actually, we're big boys and big girls out here. We will decide for ourselves what is the real news and what is propaganda. Speaking of propaganda, the corporate media is still out there with two other big whoppers of fake news, Iran's threat to Israel and Iran's threat of nuclear weapons. Now, we have had 12 years of everybody looking at Iran's nuclear program. They have not found anything at all. The only evidence that ever surfaced was the so-called laptop Odeth, which was laundered through a terrorist group, NEK, and framed on Iran. And nuclear weapons experts looking at it said it was all a hoax, because the graphs and the charts and everything were stuff that were taken off the Internet, and nothing actually made sense. You really couldn't build anything from the information. It was just a prop to wag at you and say, Iran is a threat, Iran is a threat. Now, I'd like to remind everybody of a little history. Iran has not launched a war of aggression against another country in over 200 years. It is simply not their nature. Remember when they tried to claim Ahmadinejad said that we're going to wipe Israel off the map? That was another corporate media lie. People who actually know the language, looking at the tape, said, no, what Ahmadinejad said was that Israel, because of its crimes and corruptions, will vanish from the pages of history. But that's a very passive observation. It's not a threat. Most of what you see in the corporate media, and that includes, unfortunately, Donald Trump, is filtered through an organization called MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, which provides free translations of articles in the Arab media for the Western corporate media. The problem is MEMRI is an Israeli propaganda operation that always mistranslates and spins the translations to make the Arab states look terrible and make Israel look great. It's all filtered and processed, and we've got to get past the filters. We've got to get around the filters and get to those primary sources. This corporate media wants to stand between you and the real world and just let things through that they feel that you should have. We're coming up on a commercial break here. When we come on back, more about the media, more about the wars, and more about how the corporate media really is thrashing and struggling with this, and they should. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Facebook is having a really rough time. For one thing, the fact that Facebook is also trying to set itself up as the arbiter of what is real and fake news has drawn a huge amount of laughter. A lot of people are leaving Facebook right now because of the very obvious overt censorship. Facebook is in trouble for all these repeated mistakes, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, that overinflate the ad revenues. And now, apparently Facebook has won a little bit of a distinction. They've landed themselves on 24/7 Wall Street's list of America's most hated companies, coming in at number 6. And they just narrowly beat out Spirit Airlines, which for anyone who's been left stranded by Spirit at the O'Hare Airport in the middle of winter, that speaks volumes. But they're now a much hated company. Now, as we reported yesterday, Israel has attacked an airport near Damascus, the Mizah military air facility. The original report was warplanes. Now it's been revised to say missiles launched from around the Sea of Galilee blew up this depot. The explosions could be heard all over the place. The attack was about 5 miles from Assad's home, and there was no reason for Israel to do that. And I suspect the plan here is to goad Russia into taking some kind of an action to protect Syria from Israel, which could then be spun as a threat to Israel and used as the excuse to send those forces massed along the Polish border into Russia. Putin will not bite. He only has a week to wait things out. Meanwhile, this may be the beginning of Trump's disillusionment about Israel and recognition of its true nature. The Damascus water crisis is now over. The Syrian military has retaken Wadi Barada, and so the drinking water is back online there in Damascus as well. Now, here's a bizarre story coming out of Information Liberation. They're quoting a report from Israeli news service Ynet saying that Israeli and American intelligence officials have, in effect, agreed to hide intelligence from President Trump. And their rationale for that is that he's a Russian stooge. If we tell him anything, it'll get back to Putin. Now, I have a little reminder. If what Mossad wants to do, they're going to do here. If you're the American intelligence agencies, I'd like to remind you, the President of the United States is your boss, and you don't have any foundation or legal right to withhold necessary intelligence from him. If you catch him sending it to a foreign leader, then you can take action, although obviously you sat on your thumbs when Hillary Clinton was doing exactly the same. But apparently the push is still on to somehow gin up some kind of a reason for war with Iran. And the concern is that as Mossad and American intelligence agencies come up with ways to frame Iran, that Trump might say, hey, let's not start any more wars on the basis of lies, or even worse, he might give Tehran the heads up. Say, Israel's saying bad things about you again. Now, probably unconnected with Israel's attack on the military base near Damascus, Russia has now withdrawn their 6 Sukhoi Su-24 fighters from their air base in the Latakia province and replaced them with 4 Sukhoi Su-25s, the next one up. So, better plane, fewer of them. It looks like they're just trying to rotate forces in and out on a regular basis here. Now, the buildup of the war machine on the Polish border is continuing. And apparently Poland has just sealed a deal to acquire 70 AGM-158B JASSM-ER missiles from the United States. These have an operational range of 1,000 kilometers and the ability to knock out key stationary infrastructure sites located deep inside Russia's territory. Basically, it's a cruise missile, a very accurate long-range one. And the U.S. is now handing 70 of these things to Poland. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And real quick before we get back to the war zones, we're getting word that there's been a major fire at a bus terminal on Detroit's east side. Looking at the local media there, they're saying there was a fire and then reports of an explosion. But the further out you go, the media leads explosions and fire at bus terminal. Well, if it started as a fire, there's a good explanation for the explosions, and that would be the fuel tanks and the tires. Those big tires are inflated to a high pressure, and when the fire burns through the rubber, they'll basically pop, and that makes a big noise. So we'll see what's going to be happening over there. Getting on back to the rush to war with Russia, story, very alarming story coming out of Russia Insider. As you know, the U.S. has been sending all this heavy equipment to Europe last week, tanks and so forth and so on. Now the soldiers themselves are on the way. An entire U.S. Armored Brigade, 3rd Armored Brigade, 4th Infantry Division, is on its way to the Russian border. Now, a U.S. Armored Brigade fields over 400 tracked and over 1,300 wheeled vehicles, including 80 Abrams tanks and 140 Bradley armored fighting vehicles, 400 Humvees. This is a major, major invasionary force. They're all ready for the war. All they need is some way to make it look like it's Russia's fault, either goading Russia into going up against Israel and Syria, or, again, we have to keep in mind those T-72 tanks that Ukraine bought from Hungary. Junkers couldn't even move under their own power. And BBC actually did report on these tanks as being proof of a Russian invasion. And then they had to backtrack from that one. But those tanks are still there. Now, Ukraine doesn't use the T-72, so they've got absolutely no use for these tanks, even as spare parts. The only reason Ukraine would want them is to paint them in Russian colors and use them to claim Russia's invading. And they could still do that. And we need to get that out on social media so people are aware of that. And along with that, we need to remind people of how many times we've been tricked into wars with lies, fraud, and deception. The Lusitania isn't carrying weapons. It was an innocent passenger ship. That one's been demolished. Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. Well, Admiral Hyman G. Rickover demolished that lie. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin turned out to be a lie. Pearl Harbor was a surprise. No, it wasn't. Roosevelt spent the entire year goading the Japanese into the attack. Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Assad's sarin gas. How many times do you have to be lied to before you're willing to stand up and shout, I know you are lying to me, and I will not listen to you anymore? Because if you go on listening to the government and that corporate media, we're going to be at a hot war with Russia, and it will go nuclear. So get that story out on your social media. Now, the saber rattling is continuing here in the Pacific. China's state media is warning that if Donald Trump blocks China's access to the South China Sea, it does risk war. And again, there's a reason it's called the South China Sea. And those islands have been recognized as Chinese territory going back to the end of World War II and the Cairo Convention. They're just making a stink over these islands because it's an excuse to start a war. And the issue is not those islands. The issue is the yuan. That's a threat to the American financial sector. So is the ruble. That's what they want to send your kids to be killed and crippled about, removing the ruble and the yuan and leaving the world under the hegemonic domination of the United States Federal Reserve note. That's what all this bloodshed is about. Whose piece of ink and paper the world will use for the next 100 years. Now, somebody sent me this wonderful article, and we put it up at WhatReallyHappened.com, and you should look for it. The headline is Communism Dead? And it scans from a comic book that was issued in 1947, warning about how communists would subvert the nation and turn us against each other. And it's going to give you the willies when you look through this and see how many of these same tactics are in fact being used on the American people by our own government. So you got to take a look at that one here. Now, let's get into the economic news here. There's an article that came out of Zero Hedge visualizing Donald Trump's $20 trillion problem. And that is really where Donald Trump is facing his greatest problem. He wants to make America great again. I'd like to see that happen. So would you. So would everybody who voted for him. There's only one problem with it. There's nothing to work with economically. The U.S. national debt, the government's debt, is going to cross $20 trillion just as Donald Trump is taking office. Now, of course, Trump didn't create this mess. He's inheriting it. But when the economy starts to stutter and fall, you can count on the U.S. corporate media to say, oh, Trump ruined we had a wonderful, great economy here going on. Ignore all those retail closings and the 95 million people out of work and all the people on food stamps. The economy is wonderful, and that gosh darn Donald Trump, he wrecked it. And how is he going to fix it? It may require some draconian steps. In fact, over at Sovereign Man, they're saying the only way out of this mess, not just for the U.S., but for the entire globe, is a default. To simply write off all that debt. Start over, have a modern jubilee. Now, the U.S. Appeals Court has revived an antitrust lawsuit against Apple. And apparently the issue is that Apple effectively monopolized the market for iPhone apps by not allowing users to purchase apps outside the App Store. Well, you actually can do that if you jailbreak your phone. But to be very honest, I did that with my first iPhone because I was just curious what was inside the thing. But most of the apps that I saw from those third parties weren't really very good. Apple's philosophy, and I actually do agree with it, in order to guarantee the usability and security of the iPhone, they want a rigid control over the process of creating apps. And if you're writing an iPhone app, why not sell it through the App Store? Now, there's a lot of standards you've got to comply with. And I think the mere fact that you can jailbreak a phone and put your own apps on there proves that it really is not a monopoly. So we'll see what happens there. But in this particular case, I'm on Apple's side on this one here. Little alarming news coming out of Oras.com. The vast majority of the American people do not even have $500 stashed in a savings account. Of course, these days with negative interest rates, why would you? But the gist of the story is that Americans are living so close to the edge right now, they are unable to handle a $500 unplanned expense. Sudden medical bill, breakdown on the car, something like that, is going to put them in serious, serious trouble. That's way too close to the edge. I remember when I was a kid and they were encouraging saving so that you had money for a rainy day, for an emergency. And then, what was it, just 2 years ago, Yellen and the people at the Federal Reserve were saying, well, the problem with the economy is all these selfish, greedy people who are keeping their money in savings accounts and they won't take it out and spend it. Now, over at the Financial Times, they've had a pair of articles basically whining and complaining about the fact that the independent media is reporting on all the places where these financial giants are caught engaging in fraud, LIBOR, gold and silver prices, and they're not very happy with that. They're declaring it fake news propaganda, and so now we have the Financial Times editorial board basically calling for an end to freedom of speech. If you're cheated by your banker, you're not allowed to talk about it. You are not allowed to talk about it because in this day and age, we have to cheat just to stay in business, and you should just accept that, I guess. Now, the global elite over at Davos, way too late, I think, are starting to question if maybe their globalist policies have sowed the seeds of this global populist backlash. Gee, you think? Of course that's what happened. And you kind of have to wonder about the little bubble that these globalists live in, where they thought they were just going to do this, create a single global government, a single global private central bank, and rule the world from a single golden throne of planet Earth, and not run into some opposition from people who really think that human civilization is best served with the world, with a whole bunch of small nations, all about the same size, taking care of themselves. The problem with any single structure construction, maritime, government, is that a single problem can bring the whole thing crashing down. Now, another example of corporate media lying. Back in 2016, May of last year, there was a crash. Egypt Air Flight MS-804 was traveling from Paris to Cairo. It disappeared off the radar. And the media was saying, terror, 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 terror. And they even reported they found traces of explosives on the victims. Well, the French authorities have figured out what happened. Apparently, the co-pilot had stowed his iPad and iPhone 6S powered by lithium batteries, and you know how unstable those things are, along with a bunch of perfume he'd bought at the duty-free, which is flammable. He stowed it in the exact spot where the fire first emerged that took the airplane down. So the likely explanation here is that the lithium battery exploded, the perfume acted as an accelerant, and the fire spread out of control before they could do anything about it. Oh, no, 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 it's not lithium batteries, it's not perfume, it's terrorists, terrorists, terrorists. And I apologize for the long pauses, but I'm sure you don't want to hear me coughing in your ear. Now, here's a bizarre little story. Over in Oklahoma, there was a man, and when his high school girlfriend got pregnant, he married her. Okay? The honorable thing to do. Then the marriage started to fall apart, and the man began to notice that the kid really didn't look at all like him. So Thomas had a paternity test. They were heading into a divorce, and of course the mother was demanding child support. And so the boy was 3 years old. Thomas had a paternity test that came back 0. He was not the father. So the judge in the case ordered him to take another DNA test. That also came back totally negative. Now, at first the judge ruled that, yeah, if Thomas is not the father of the child, he shouldn't have to pay child support. Let's find the real father. Then they reversed the decision because apparently Oklahoma law says that if you're going to question the paternity of your child, you have to do it within the first 2 years. After that, legally, the kid is yours. Doesn't matter what happened. And it's another example of laws that are not really thought all the way through before some politician passes them and then takes credit for them on the next campaign here. Now, a lot of people are very upset over the fact that Donald Trump put Robert Kennedy Jr., a known vaccine critic, in charge of a commission on vaccine safety and scientific integrity. The pharmaceutical industry is in an uproar. You know, this commission should have been of company and corporate insiders who know what they're talking about, blah, 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 the usual thing. And there's a full court press coming from Big Pharma to find some way to derail this commission, to get Robert Kennedy out of control of it, and get some industry patsy in the place there. And they're out there hurling words about Robert Kennedy Jr., you know, he's dangerous, he's deceptive, he's a demagogue. Basically, Big Pharma is scared that Donald Trump might take away their cash cow. Now, as you know, during the campaign, it surfaced that one of Donald Trump's children may be vaccine damaged, and that may explain why he's sensitive to this issue. We know that the reason Robert De Niro was supportive initially of the documentary Vaxxed at the Tribeca Film Festival is that one of his children is autistic. And there does, forget about does seem, there is a considerable amount of evidence that something is going on, especially with that mercury-based preservative. So now Trump has angered Big Pharma along with everybody else. And they're all trying to gang up on him because, by golly, they want to go on back to that sweet government system where you will be ordered to buy and use products that might actually fry your kid's brain, because there's big money in it. And if we fry your kid's brain, there's even more money in it taking care of the kid. Now, I can understand the panic coming out of the boardrooms of Big Pharma, because the instant it is inescapable that there is, in fact, a link between mercury-based preservatives like thimerosal and autism, and that the pharmaceutical companies have known this going all the way back to the 1940s, the liability lawsuits are going to put them all out of business, and they should. We need to return to a society based on meritocracy. Companies that produce good products prosper. Companies that produce bad products and services are driven out of business. We seem to be in the reverse right now, where the more crooked a business is, the greater its success. And those who are trying to engage in honest endeavors and produce good products are shut down. It's almost like that light bulb conspiracy documentary. You know, if you make a light bulb that lasts too long, we're going to fine you. Those light bulbs are supposed to wear out at 1,000 hours. That's how we make our money. So these are going to be interesting times, these next 4 years, or however long Trump is in office and alive. All right, we're going to come up here on another commercial break, and then when we come on back, we're going to be talking about some computers and other information. So we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about computers and various other things like that. As you know, there's a lot of data mining sites out there, and starting with Ancestry.com, there are a lot of genealogy sites, and more are coming online. There's one, somebody was making a big stink about Family Tree Now, where you can go in for free and run anybody's name and see all their immediate familial connections and address information and so forth and so on, and raising the issue of privacy. And the issue of privacy is of concern. But a little bit of good news. I went into this site and I typed in my name, and pretty much about half the information was flat out wrong. Addresses I've never lived at, relatives that I'm not actually relative to, people, supposedly my friends that I've never known. So the accuracy factor is so bad, I wouldn't really worry about it all that much. And if the government's tracking systems over at the NSA are of similar accuracy, then it's no wonder they can't actually accomplish anything with all of this data here. Now, one of the appointments that Donald Trump is looking at, he's appointing Giuliani as his cyber guru, and that's drawn a lot of criticism and a little bit of laughter, because Giuliani is not a computer expert. In fact, his own personal website is very easy to break into. It's apparently just, it's almost a joke, and they're describing Giuliani as a 70-year-old Luddite, who actually brags about not using technology, and he's going to be put in charge of computer security. So, and I understand Trump has to pay back some favors from the campaign, and I would certainly hope that Giuliani is going to be smart enough to hire people smarter than himself to actually do the job. I remember many, many years ago in the heyday of the small computers, and Texas Instruments was a huge success back then. And somebody interviewed the CEO and said, what was the secret of Texas Instruments' success? And he said, my secret of success is I always hire people who are smarter than I am. And it's a good formula here. All right, so let's talk about human-caused global warming. It is getting ugly out there. Europe's cold snap death count has now hit 73, mostly, obviously, among the homeless and refugees who are refusing to go to warming centers or hotels out of concerns of being arrested and deported. And this may convince a lot of them to actually migrate back once the spring thaw gets here. It is so cold. How cold is it? Apparently, up in the town of Kennedy in Kitson County, Minnesota, the town's water tower froze blocking off their water. Now, they're basically sucking water from the North Kitson Rural Water System, but that's cold when the water tower itself freezes. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2 here, and let's get on back up here to some of the news here. By the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. I think the lines are working. All right, so we're talking about human-caused global warming, and obviously it's not there. And the corporate media is still out there saying, look, the fact that there's snow and ice in record amounts is no reason to doubt us when we say that the world is warming, snowfalls are a thing of the past, which is what they were saying back in 2000. Snowfalls are now a thing of the past. Oh, well, yes, we've got snow and ice, but the heat is still there. It's hiding in the bottom of the ocean. It's hiding up in the Arctic. It's hiding in your bedroom closet. It's just waiting for you to drop your guard and refuse to pay a carbon tax, and then it's going to come out and get you. So we're looking at the actual weather forecasts here for Winter Storm Jupiter. It's already being called Icepocalypse. Heavy black ice, heavy snow coming to the plains and the Midwest. Reader sent me a photo from some of the snow up in Oregon. It's just absolutely amazing. We're not talking light dusting here. We're talking like get out there with a broom and clear off your roof, because if that snow is too sticky, you could actually see roofs collapse from it. Now, as you know, there has been a problem with radiation ever since they started tinkering around with the atom. Some of the radiation from those Pacific nuclear tests and Nevada nuclear tests is still floating around there. That Nevada test ground is still a hot zone. You can't go in there. Over at the Trinity site, they paved it over to try and get the radiation under control there, because tourists like to go down there and visit. But there is a problem. And part of the problem is that you've got Fukushima, you've got Chernobyl, you've got 3 Mile Island, you've got Hanford. And the new problem now is that the fracking industry has a little nudge-nudge, wink-wink deal with a lot of other corporations to take their toxic waste that cannot legally be disposed of, and they'll mix it into their fracking fluid, and they pump it deep in the ground on the theory that it will stay there. Only now we're finding out it doesn't, because it's fracturing the rocks. And once the rocks are fractured, that fluid can go anywhere that it wants to, and we've already seen incidents where some of the freed methane from the fracking comes on up into lakes, streams, and ponds. It depletes the water of oxygen, and the fish die off. And they'll always say, oh, the fish died from oxygen depletion. What they're not telling you is the oxygen in the water is being depleted by the bubbling of methane from underground. Now, some of that toxic waste that is the fracking industry is paid to get rid of is radioactive material. And it, too, is percolating up. And just like the fracking chemicals themselves, it's starting to get into the public drinking water. Well, Obama's Environmental Protection Agency has an answer for that. By golly, they're going to solve the problem. They've just approved dramatic increase in limits on radiation exposure allowable in the public drinking water. They've increased the allowable levels thousands of times over the current legal limits. That's their solution. You know, my water glows in the dark. Yeah, but it's below the limit we set. So you're okay. Go ahead and just go on drinking it and so forth and so on. That's their solution. And we've seen that before when that synthetic protein plastic was being found in baby food. They raised the allowable limit. Problem solved. They're within the official mandated government limits, therefore they're okay. We don't have to do anything about it here. All right, let's take a phone call. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Mike, I can think, I've been doing a lot, I guess a little bit of speculation here on what's really going on with the last few days here of Obama's administration before Trump gets in. And part of it is what I get listening to InfoWars and the way Alex Jones seems very excited. I think what's happening is there's kind of a civil war going on in this government. I think that Obama is basically a dictator. He loves to be a dictator. He loves to declare martial law, cancel the elections, and at the same time possibly use Russia as a scapegoat and go to war there for some kind of a war, thinking it won't be that the White House wouldn't be evaporated, vaporized, I mean. But what I think is going on, though, is the military is telling him, no, you're not going to do this stuff. You're going to get out when you're supposed to. And the reason, I think Alex Jones's contacts probably are Mike Flynn, the General Flynn and his son. Even though his son supposedly is not with the campaign anymore, I'm sure his son is privy to a lot of things. And I know he's got, I believe he's friends with Joe Biggs. You remember Joe Biggs?
Yes, I remember.
He still lives. He's part-time with it. And who's also a good friend of Michael Hastings, who was murdered by the FBI.
Yes.
He was in his unit when in Afghanistan. He was embedded with his unit in Afghanistan. So I think what's going on is, this is where I think Jones is getting a lot of his information. He doesn't say it, of course, but the impression I get. And I believe I do believe that's what's happening. I believe the military has basically told Obama, if you try anything funny like this, we're going to arrest you, plain and simple. We're going to remove you from the White House. And we have to, we'll do it in handcuffs.
Well, I doubt it's that simple and direct. Anytime anybody wants to do something like this, the first thing they have to do is ask, can I get away with this? Can I succeed? Can I pull it off? Because the consequences of failure are going to be dramatic, if not fatal. And I'm sure that in the past there have been a lot of times where somebody put together a plan to accomplish something like a coup d'etat or the end of the republic. I mean, the bankers did it back in 1933, and they failed, but they managed to keep it secret. So I think probably what is restraining Obama from trying something dramatic like that is the realization, or at least I hope he understands, that the majority of the American people aren't going to buy the official story from whatever false flag they pull on off. I mean, once a government has lost the population's suspension of disbelief, the party is over. Everybody in America is looking for that next lie, that next deception, that next fraud.
But yeah, I agree what you're saying, but I think also it's a little nudge from the military, because if he had any idea of taking over, whether the American people wanted it or not, he'd have to have the military on his side.
Yeah, no question about that.
Federal police would be killed would be destroyed in a minute by the American people. So would the regular police if they backed them up. The only organization that could possibly, and even they would have a very tough time if they could even do it would be the United States military. But I also think he is considering that war option, because, like you just said, with Israel, what Israel has pulled with the Syrians there. But I think, I believe they have told him. They have told him no uncertain terms. Don't do it. Get out of there. He's going to get his way too big pension and his big house in Washington, D.C. with the wall around it, and send his kids to the finest schools and whatever else. You want that rather than a federal prison cell in Leavenworth, or maybe in Supermax here in Florence, Colorado. You better behave and don't even think about doing anything like that.
Okay, well let me back up here a little bit, because Obama's wanting to find some way to stay in office after his 2 terms. And by the way, every president in the middle of their second term starts thinking, how could I arrange to stay in this job a little bit longer? And none of them have worked out. That is actually a separate issue from the war agenda against Russia. The agenda for war against Russia and China is rooted solely in economic domination of the world, because the United States, if it's not in charge, cannot survive. And right now, the ruble and the yuan continue to displace the dollar in international trade and banking, and that means fewer and fewer nations coming to the U.S. Federal Reserve to borrow U.S. dollars at interest to conduct business with. And that's the problem that underlies this rush to war with Russia and China. Now, as far as Obama trying something dramatic to stay in office, that I think is something that's happening in parallel and is not necessarily linked to it. But again, yes, you're correct. Obama would need the military on his side, and the military might balk at that. In fact, we're looking at this situation from last summer where supposedly Major General John Rossi committed suicide just 2 days from when he was going to be promoted to a 3-star general and take command of the Army Space and Missile Command. And supposedly he killed himself at home, and they admitted they couldn't find any event, no infidelity, no misconduct, no drug or alcohol abuse that would trigger the suicide. Oh, he was just afraid of the added responsibilities. I seriously doubt that. That's not the military mindset. So I remember during the Bush administration and Clinton administration, a lot of high-ranking military died under questionable circumstances. Admiral Borda, for example, and it may be that the president was going to these top commanders and saying, we're getting ready to stage a major transition of this country away from the Constitution and into something that's a lot more fun for us at the top. And some of these commanders may have balked and paid the price for it.
Well, I hope, you probably are right to a degree. But remember, once he declares war against Russia, once there's a war against, especially against a major power like Russia, 2 things are going to happen. Either he would have to declare martial law at that point and could then try to stay in, and or he's just putting Trump in a bad position because if the war doesn't turn nuclear, if it turns nuclear, there won't be a inauguration. That'll be it, probably the planet. But if it doesn't turn
all
nuclear,
right, let me back up here a little bit. Okay. There is no justification for a declaration of domestic martial law when war happens with another country. There's no precedent for it in history, so that is not going to happen. I agree that if they're going to start a hot war with Russia, it has to be like right now, so that Donald Trump can't back out of it once he takes office, which is just a week away. And so I would almost expect to see something happen this weekend where they're either going to do something with the T-72 tanks, or they're going to scream that Russia's attacking Israel, or just anything they can pull out of thin air and just launch that blitzkrieg from Poland into Russia. Now, they don't have enough time in a week to reach all the way to Moscow, but they could definitely take control of Minsk. That's only about 150 miles in, and they got a lot of rivers to cross and everything. But they could do that. Once they have that, and then NATO says we're not going to give it back, then there is not much that Donald Trump could do to end the war at that point.
But Mike, I don't see. I think that what would happen if there's a war, he would right away declare that people like you and me and Alex Jones and other sites and many patriots around the country who actually like Russia and think that Putin is actually a good man, not the kind of guy but I think they'll start declaring people like us as Russian agents, and that'll be their excuse.
They've already done that. That's what the Washington Post smear job was all about. And yes, that might happen, but that is far less severe than a declaration of martial law against the whole population, which I think could actually trigger a civil war, because nobody is nobody is going to buy. It doesn't matter what they come up with. Used up T-72 tanks, Russia attacking. It doesn't matter what this government and corporate media says. The vast majority of the American people, 94%, are not going to buy it, and they're not going to go along.
Oh, which could trigger civil war. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, well, I'd like to avoid that.
But Obama is. I believe Obama is evil. I believe this man is evil. I believe he would love to be a dictator, and I believe he has intentions of doing that, except that he realizes he won't get away with it. Thank God we do have a military, I think, that's halfway responsible, at least as far as that goes.
Well, most rank-and-file military I know, in fact, I would venture to say all the rank-and-file military I know at heart are strict constitutionalists, and so that's a positive thing. Now, as far as Obama is concerned, I don't think terms like good and evil necessarily should even be used here, but he definitely shows signs of sociopathy, as did Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, and to a lesser extent George W. Bush. He definitely has narcissistic personality disorder when you look at how often he refers to himself in all of his speeches about what a great guy he is. And, I do think in the future that we ought to have some major psychological screening of anybody who's running for elected office or being considered for a high office. we've got to start keeping these nutcases out of power.
It's really hard to do because right now you can run for president. When I lived in Texas, I was a correctional officer down here.
Okay.
And I wanted to get out of corrections and get into work at Bell Helicopter and their security, you know. But I couldn't pass the background because of my credit. My credit at the time was horrible.
Yes.
You know, I just had a bankruptcy, a foreclosure, and all that, and there's no way. So what the thing is this. But yet, if I was running for president, that would have been fine. That would have been nothing. You saw Hillary, that she could run for president. She couldn't have qualified to have most federal job, even non-security job.
Yeah.
And yet, she could run for president. It's going to be very hard to do that.
All right, well, listen, Mark, I got to let you go. We got callers starting to call into the show here. I need to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who've just now rejoined our network. Actually, they joined about 10 minutes ago, and I'm a little late saying hello, aloha to all of you out there. And we're going to switch over to Al in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I hope you're well and your lovely wife, Lady Claire.
Yes.
Yeah, you're talking about, it actually kind of scared me a little. I just, kind of tuned in about 10 minutes ago when you were talking about these parallelisms between these people that are dying under suspicious circumstances. And then, you follow it up with what you think could be the reason. And, that sort of thing really scares me because I kind of think that way myself, especially when, these people are kind of like high-ranking within the government, whether or not, they're elected or not, which the ones that are often not elected are a little scarier. And, you were talking about Obama with his speech. I think you said, or I read, he referred to himself 75 times. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow. Yeah, see, that's your classic narcissist.
Yes.
I mean, things got to change. I mean, up here in Canada, our prime minister is basically a dictator for 4 years. I mean, he's out of control. And, I even read on your website something about, drawing parallelisms to the Clinton Foundation, which wouldn't surprise me. I mean...
Well, no, that article was basically saying Trudeau has his own foundation, and people are looking at it and saying it appears to be just as much of a fraud as the Clinton Foundation. It's not actually doing a lot of charitable work. It just seems to be a giant slush fund, and that seems to be something all top politicians feel that they need and are entitled to. I mean, back in Richard Nixon's day, it was just a safe in the White House that had the off-books money.
Yeah, and people don't really realize. I mean, after almost 50 years, it was Justin Trudeau's father who got us into the G7, Canada that is, and basically sold out the country to the private banks. And it wasn't long after that, which was like in 1974. I think in 1981, the very first food bank popped up in Canada, and it was somewhere out like in Saskatchewan and Alberta. Anyway, I appreciate your time, Mike. I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. And, yeah, it was that joining of the G7, which is why the Canadian government stopped getting interest-free loans from the Bank of Canada, as authorized in the Canadian bank's charter, and started borrowing all of their money from the banks at interest and sticking the Canadian taxpayers with those interest payments. That was part of the deal. If you join the G7, you will enslave your people to our banks and not dare make your own currency and your own money here. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial break. We have a couple more calls waiting we're going to get to as soon as we're back from words from our sponsor. Meanwhile, apparently out in California, the school system is going to launch a curriculum to teach children that the corporate media is always the real news and everything on the Internet should be ignored. Your tax dollars at work. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Alan in Australia. G'day, mate. What's going on down there? Alan, are you there?
Just dropped off for a second there. G'day from Convict Central, Mike.
Well, g'day to you too.
I've got a question for you, Michael.
Okay.
Here in Australia, once we have an election, the winner takes over. why is it 2 months before the new president gets into power in America? Surely it needs to change to stop the diabolical shenanigans that Obama's up to at the moment.
Well, the reason for the change is everybody is following the timeline established in the Constitution, which was set up in a day when horse and carriage was basically the fastest available transportation. And it may be a little bit outdated, but most incoming presidents definitely are very busy during that 2 months to try and set up their management team going on in. So there may be room for a little bit of an adjustment, but I don't think the president taking over the day they win the election might be practical. I mean, unless both candidates have essentially a government in waiting ready to plug in that instant.
Well, yeah, that's what happens in Australia. They go to the election with their policies and government ready to go, and the people decide what to do. And that's another thing. Like we've just had one of the longest elections here in Australia, which was 2 months election period.
Yes.
You guys got to go for it over a year. Surely that's such a waste of money.
I agree. I agree. I mean, it's certainly very beneficial to the corporate media who are making huge amounts of money running campaign ads and everything. I mean, Hillary spent $1.3 billion on her campaign and still managed to lose. But, yeah, it really is a bit of a circus, and I'm actually in agreement. I think, just like I think we should only put up the Christmas decorations 2 weeks before Christmas, I think we should have the presidential campaign basically limited to 2 months before the actual election, because this last election just got completely out of control with all the rancor and all the fraud and all the backroom dealing and everything. It was a bit of an embarrassment for the American people, for the world to see all of this unfold.
Yes. I've just got one more comment and I'll let you go. I just wanted to comment on all the emails that came out from the Democrats, all of them. None of it had anything to do with our policy, about the people, nothing at all other than obtaining money and obtaining power, which kind of points to kind of what a corrupt organisation they've become.
Well, I mean, it's not limited to the Democrats. Both parties are equally corrupt here. And, yeah, it was an eye-opener for the American people, and that's why the Democrats are so upset, is that the American people got to see what they're really like instead of making their electoral decisions on that carefully crafted media image of Hillary Clinton. And we shouldn't be voting on the basis of best dressed or most charming or the rest of it. We really should have a much closer look into the character of these people before they're ever allowed into power. And we did get to see Hillary's character and that of her close associates fully on display with those emails. And the interesting thing is we need to focus on what was on those emails, not how they came to be made public. It's almost irrelevant at this point, although I think Seth Rich leaked them. But this circus about Russia hacking, in part, was to keep people's focus away from what was actually in those emails.
And I'm not too sure if you realise, Mike, but you and Claire are a very important resource for the world. When anyone wakes up, I know in Australia I point them directly to WhatReallyHappened.com because you cut to the chase, and it's really helpful for people when they're first starting to find out what's going on in the world. So thank you.
Thank you for the kind words. And I'm just doing what I'm doing here, and I prefer not to think about how much impact, where, and when, because that kind of thinking can drive you crazy. I'm just going to stay focused on...
all across the world.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to stay focused on the task at hand. Thank you for the phone call, Alan, and we're actually going to leave the next phone call until after the commercial break because I don't want to get them started and then cut them off and everything like that. Apparently, 10 brands of baby wipes have been recalled because they've been contaminated with pneumonia-causing bacteria. These are 10 brands of baby wipes produced by the Pennsylvania-based NewTek Disposables. And apparently, parents opening them up just said that they were discolored and foul-smelling, and so they've been recalled. Somebody wasn't being very careful. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Ernest in Reno, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you and several of your guests. You're talking about how Obama's thinking he might do this, but honestly, I have to disagree that he's all these people, Obama, Hillary, the Bushes, these were all role players as, being president, that they have their scripts, they're front runners, and they know better than to deviate and try to actually be a leader. I think that they don't want what happened to Kennedy happen to them, or even what happened to Reagan happen to them. So this whole idea that these individuals are actually guiding world events, I don't believe that's true.
Well, it's an overlapping web of competing powers and interests, and the reason Kennedy was taken out and the reason why Trump is at risk was for going up against the CIA, which has clearly grown way too big for its britches, and now thinks that it, rather than the American people, should be in charge of the government and policy. But we have seen presidents before who push for more and more power, but as long as they're still friends with the CIA, they're generally going to get it. I mean, the Clintons and the Bushes' political fortunes all meet back in the mid-1980s in Arkansas with this Operation Screw Worm, had a couple of other names as well, where the CIA was illegally sending untraceable military weapons to the Nicaraguan Contras, and because it was illegal and there was no tax revenue available for it, they were paying for it all by smuggling cocaine back into the United States and selling it to our kids. And then Governor Bill Clinton was in charge of security, keeping state drug investigators away from the airports where this was all going on, and setting up this money laundry for the CIA, which was this network of land flip deals like Whitewater, Castle Grand, Flowerwood, banks like Madison Guarantee, and the payouts were made through an Arkansas state agency, the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, which was created by Webb Hubbell and signed into law by Bill Clinton. Well, once you're buddy-buddy with the CIA like that, you can go on just doing whatever you want, including murdering the White House deputy counsel, and you can get away with it. And to this very day, if Hillary had one thing that she could point to as her legacy, it's the ability to basically avoid the consequences of her actions for going on 30 years.
Mike, as long as you're in compliance with these organizations, of course you can push for a little bit more of what you want. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that this whole agenda, the globalist agenda, as long as you stay within those parameters, that first of all, you seem to from what I hear, that this globalist agenda seemed to have started sometime after World War II, which I believe, and many others, that this globalist agenda has really started the modern version, the turn of the 20th century. That the First World War was started to start an actual organization, a war to end all wars. That was the slogan, but they didn't get that because the League of Nations failed. So they had to start another one.
Yeah, the United Nations, which is also starting to fail. Apparently, the U.S. Senate is looking at a bill to cut off all U.S. contributions to the United Nations over the Security Council vote on Israel's settlement. And, yeah, go ahead and do it. It may be, first of all, there's always going to be somebody who wants to form a one-world government all the way back to Alexander the Great, and they tend to overlap and hand off and hand off and hand off. And, yes, even at the turn of the century, there were dreams of a global empire among several different players and parties, and unfortunately it's continuing to the present day. And it's one thing when you're fighting with swords on horseback or even musketry to entertain a global government, but in an age of nuclear weapons, that is a very, very dangerous and outdated concept. And
right. Globalists, that doesn't matter. So globalists, the consequences of what might happen is it doesn't matter because they want a complete destruction. They want to rise up like a phoenix and start the New World Order without majority of people here, period. So they don't care about starting a new.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to start a brand new world. When the Earth is a burned out, highly radioactive crisp. And I would like to think that they would restrain themselves in that regard. But again, in the age of nuclear weapons, and especially biological weapons, and all this reckless behavior with genetic engineering, I tend to go back to von Clausewitz, who said the reality is in the modern world. I'm paraphrasing loosely. The reality in the modern world is the real enemy of us all is war itself.
Right. But the whole plan, the ultimate thing was to use the United States as the global military to try to bring it about, and it hasn't worked seamlessly, as we know. We saw how Russia was the big monkey wrench to it, so now it seems like maybe they've done all they could with our country. Now they're ready to just pull the plug on us, and that's what we really have to worry about, like you said, in the next 7 days at least.
Well, we've got all these forces, NATO and the U.S., massed up on the Polish border here, and I understand Putin has finally responded to all of that because on his side of the borders, he's setting up safe spaces and transgender bathrooms to welcome those U.S. troops in, make them feel comfortable. Okay. So.
I don't see how the masses can't see that, the timing of all this coming down, or if they don't even think about it. I just don't understand.
Oh, I disagree. I think the vast majority of people understand clearly what's going on. They need to speak out about it a little bit more.
That's what I'm saying. They should say.
Yeah, they got to stand up and shout, this push for war with Russia is nonsense. And I say let's take everybody who's in favor of this war, like John McCain and Lindsey Graham, and let's crate them up, remember the air holes this time, and just FedEx them to Moscow. And send an email to Putin, we're sending you a present, these are the troublemakers, do with them what you will.
Don't even give them a parachute.
Well, no, I'm going to use FedEx this time. I'm changing my model. I'm not even going to give them a gun or a parachute or anything. I'm just, put them in a crate, some packaged food, water, and air holes, and just get FedEx to take them over to Moscow.
Right. Okay, Mike, yeah, that's a good idea. Have a good one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to go to Terry in British Columbia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, how are you, Mike?
Hanging in there.
Good. The second time I've called in, and earlier you were talking a little bit about global warming and the scam that goes along with that. I grew up in northern BC where the pine beetle infestation here in our country and kind of took off, and mostly because we've gone through a period of warming and, it didn't kill them off every year. And so I think we're kind of, with what we're seeing here in BC this year and last year, I think we're trending into that cold period again, and hopefully so. But again, I'd just like to let all your listeners know that there's a lot of, there's always two sides to a story, and it's, people want to get caught up in this environmentalist kind of idea and that kind of thing. But I think if they do some research for themselves and do some reading and look at everybody else's opinion, they'll find that there's a lot of underhanded, fishy things going on, and Earth goes through different cycles, right? And so, first of all, I'd just like your readers to know that. Again, I told the guy who answered the phone originally that I wanted to send a shout-out to you and Claire and your whole team there. You absolutely are a great resource for this planet right now. And it's nice to see that you guys are picking up listeners in different places, Costa Rica here the other day and that kind of thing. Keep up the good work. I've been listening to Alex Jones, and it's really hard for me to listen to him, and mostly because he's so theatric. Mm-hmm. He just puts on this show that just kind of seems to me like he's more of an actor sometimes. I mean, some the information he's trying to convey can be good and all that kind of thing, but the way he presents it just kind of turns me off. And I think that's why I'm more in tune with listening to you and your show, because you convey your ideas and your thoughts concisely, and people kind of pick up on that, and it's more of like, you're talking to us, the actual citizens, and I really appreciate that. So, I won't keep you. I'll let you go, and keep up the good work, and that's about it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and please try and stay warm. And politicians are always going to take something that happens naturally. They're going to declare it a crisis and then offer to sell you a solution. And certainly we all appreciate nature. We want to preserve as much of it that still remains as we possibly can. But this sets us up to be exploited and used by those who are profiting off of their professed concern for the environment. And certainly that is true of this global warming hysteria, where the goal is to buy and sell carbon credits or to impose carbon taxes. Interesting little story. When Al Gore really got going on this global warming and carbon dioxide thing, there was actually a member of his staff who did a back-of-the-envelope calculation and said, you know, if we just increase decorator plants by 10% in everybody's home and every office building, that'll absorb the extra carbon dioxide and the problem is solved. He was fired the next day because solving the CO2 wasn't the issue. The CO2 was the sales tool on which Al Gore was going to sell you his carbon credits, and Obama was going to sell you a carbon tax, and the globalists were going to sell you obeisance to a global environmental authority. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Andy in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hey, Mike. First we need to go on and relax about Alex Jones because simply he's just growing. He's growing huge. This guy has done a lot for the alternative media, despite where his heart is, whether it's with Israel or whoever it's with. He has given us some great knowledge and whatnot, and I think we need to just relax a little bit on what he's doing.
Well, he got me my start in talk radio back in 2007. I mean, I'm coming up on my decade in talk radio this year, and Alex Jones did that, and I'll always be grateful for that. But we did cross lances, as it were, over the issue of Israel. But I still link to stories from his website and so forth and so on. But the other caller was right. We have two different styles of presentation, but that's all it really is, a difference of style. Alex Jones has the money to have a nice studio and try and look more like corporate media. Obviously, I can't do that, and so I'm not even going to try.
Well, there's no comparison, Mike. I mean, absolutely, you give out far more information than their organization does. I listen to him every day.
Well, I have to. I have to. You're not tuning in for my sex appeal.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm not even watching you. I always listen to you, so maybe you do have some sex appeal. I don't know. But what I called in for was, so how do us people, I mean, as a people, I mean, you and I get busted for little tiny things all the time, whatever it might be, and yet we just stand by and pretend like these people in power, that they're untouchable. I mean, how come this is going on? How come we can't prosecute these people? I mean, there's so many crimes. These guys have done far more than any drug dealer in Chicago has done.
Well, they're closely aligned. They're closely. Well, the problem is there used to be a right for ordinary citizens to make criminal arrests and file criminal charges. Unfortunately, back again in the 1980s, the Supreme Court took that away from us. And just like we saw out there in California, where they wanted to take the decision over whether to prosecute a police officer for a wrongful shooting away from the grand jury and leave it up to the prosecutors, we've evolved to a system today where the choice whether or not to prosecute somebody for a crime is now in the hands of a political appointee, and the people no longer have access to the courts. Obviously, a good example would be Loretta Lynch, who blocked investigation and prosecution of Hillary Clinton. At the same time, Lynch was saying they were going to sue those global warming deniers out of business. And that is definitely the hallmark of dictatorship, when prosecution for criminality is selective and politically based. And it's certainly not the way this country was set up to be, because we were set up to be a nation ruled by laws to which everybody was subject, from the guy putting tires on your car all the way up to the president themselves.
Well, how can these ding-dongs actually expect us to follow the laws when we can watch the TV news, listen to people like yourself and whatnot, and see that they're not following the law? I mean, that just rings for unlawfulness, and therefore that even brings about more crimes, as you will, because there's a lot of laws that make a lot of things that you do that shouldn't be a crime anyway. But they do this, and here we are sitting here. I got family members in jail for ding-dong stuff. I've been in jail for ding-dong stuff, and yet these people can launder money, $860 billion in drug money from Wells Fargo and Wachovia, and they get a $110 million fine, and boom, that's the end of it. Nobody goes to jail. You got the Clinton Foundation. You got Feinstein, or not Feinstein, but Epstein and his little pedophile island, and you got big people's names going to that. I mean, this is just crazy. We allow them to cage us, but we can't cage them.
Well, that definitely needs to change here. Right now we're in a system where the little criminals go to prison and the big criminals go to Congress, and that definitely does have to change. But we allowed them to basically grab the authority and the decision-making over who is prosecuted and who is not, and that was a tremendous freedom. Most people didn't appreciate how much we lost when the Supreme Court took that away from us. And now they're trying to take the decision-making about prosecution even away from the grand jury and say it's just up to the prosecutors to make those decisions. Remember when Bill Clinton came into office, he did the unprecedented step of firing all the U.S. attorneys in all 50 states and replacing them with his cronies. And from then on, anything that Bill Clinton or his friends did was not to be prosecuted. That's how open and overt that kind of tyranny was. Reminds me of an old Batman episode when Egghead steals the election and becomes the mayor. And the police are saying, well, that criminal's a friend of Mayor Egghead. I can't do anything about him, but here's your speeding ticket.
Well, hey, Mike, I already knew the answer to the question before I asked it. I'm just glad I got your perspective on it. I also want to say I can tell you're under the weather a little bit just by your voice. And
just a little tiny bit. Well, after the show, I'm going to start resting, and hopefully by Monday I'll be back to my normal, obnoxious, annoying self. Andy, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go.
Take care of yourself.
All right, bye-bye. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're coming up on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. And real quick, responding to an email, please discuss Putin's decision to not go back to the G8. And considering how they treated him and how the U.S. likes to use organizations like this as a club, my question is, why would Putin want to at this point? It's becoming more and more obvious that all these multinational trade organizations and treaties and so forth are just another way of constraining other countries to do their business in a way that favors the United States. Good examples would be the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which sought to force other countries to buy American products that maybe those other countries didn't want, like our GMO agricultural produce here. All righty, I'm going to skip ahead in the talking points here because this is a story that's kind of fascinating and involves a little personal history. And this is coming out of FARS News. Now, last year, scientists reported that unusual orbital patterns in Kuiper Belt objects could be explained by the influence of a single larger planet far beyond the orbit of Neptune. And they did some more refinements, and they kept working on this thing. And basically said it's an ice giant, maybe smaller than Neptune, and really very far away from the sun. They were saying it might take 20,000 years to complete a single orbit. Now they're saying that it looks like it's not actually orbiting our sun, it's just whizzing on past. And this might be an explanation for why all these so-called 10th planet searches, up until Pluto got demoted, and I'm a stickler, to me Pluto's always going to be a planet, why they came up short, because every time the calculations would point at a different part of the sky. And when I was working at the Table Mountain Observatory, there was a big hue and cry. There was a new set of calculations showing where the 10th planet would be, and we fired up the big telescope, and we took a whole bunch of photographic plates, and we didn't find anything. But this would be an explanation for why all of this data keeps pointing in different locations. We're not hunting a new extrasolar planet. We're detecting extrasolar objects that are simply passing by. But they're a lot closer than we had thought. We tend to think of our next neighbor in space as the next star, Alpha Centauri, 4.5 light years away, comfortably distant, not going to give us any problems. And now we're finding out that there may be ice planets, ice giants wandering around that don't actually belong to a star. And it would actually make sense to surrender this idea that all planets must be orbiting a star somewhere. So I found that very, very interesting there. Apparently, a man and his daughter who've been missing at sea for more than a month have finally landed on Australia after sailing their damaged yacht all across the Tasman Sea, 1,241 miles. An amazing feat of seamanship. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with the lovely Lady Claire after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who will join us on Hour 3 of our Fridays with her unique perspective on the world. So what is the first thing you want to talk about?
Something that is making the hair on the back of my head stand up and break down. Apparently the head of the D.C. National Guard is to be removed from his post in the middle of inauguration. He's the guy who heads the D.C. National Guard and is integral to overseeing the inauguration, said Friday that he's been ordered removed from command effective January 20th, 12:01 p.m., which is just the moment that Donald Trump is sworn in as president.
Well, you're not the only person to notice this.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this article. This timing is very unusual. It's never happened before.
Yeah.
And it's causing a firestorm on Twitter,
yeah,
where we have had all of these buttercups and snowflakes and has-been Hollywood celebrities screaming, we're going to have riots after the inauguration. We're going to disrupt things. And it looks like whoever issued this order wants to paralyze the Washington, D.C. National Guard so that they cannot respond effectively to this kind of a situation. Do we know who actually issued this order?
Now, that's where it gets interesting, because the order came from the Pentagon, but we don't know from whom. And there is no replacement listed. Hello.
Okay, that's very alarming.
Yeah,
that is very alarming indeed.
Yeah, you know. And apparently this guy was well-liked, this General Schwartz, very, very, very good for the Guard. And all I've got to say, Mike, is the timing of this firing doesn't augur well for a smooth transition.
No, it doesn't. And like I was commenting to my audience before, this smacks of when Bill Clinton replaced the head of the FBI on the very same day, same moment that Vincent Foster's murdered body was being dumped in Fort Marcy Park. So, yes, I'm a little alarmed about this.
Yeah, it's freaking me out. There was a marvelous interview with Dr. Helen Caldicott. And for our readers and listeners who do not know who this woman is, she is a very ardent campaigner against nuclear weapons. She was the founder of Physicians for Social Responsibility, and she was commenting on the fact that SecDef nominee Mattis told the Senate committee on Thursday that NATO must build capability in Eastern Europe to deter Russia's alleged aggression. And this came one day after Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson testified that the United States would defend NATO states if Russia was invaded. And what she said was there's little or no evidence that Russia is being aggressive toward the NATO countries. And she said this is a lie that the United States insists on maintaining. And Caldicott pointed out that it was the U.S. and NATO, not Russia, that was building up all of these arms on Russia's border to unprecedented levels in Central and Eastern Europe and really exacerbating tensions in the region. And, I don't know about the timing. I do know that it seems rather odd right before Trump's inauguration that all of this stuff is being pre-positioned on Russia's border.
Well, again, I don't think they can wait for Inauguration Day.
Yeah.
I would not be at all surprised to see something happen this weekend,
yeah.
They're going to need a few days to get as far as they can into Belarus, which is part of the Russian Republic, as they can to achieve a point where NATO will say, well, we're not going to pull back.
Yeah.
And there's going to be, Donald Trump's not going to be able to do anything about it. He'll be hamstrung at that point.
Yeah.
But they're going to need a few days to do that. I was looking at the territory in Google Earth, a lot of rivers. I think it would be very foolish for our military to be commandeering the highways because then they become single-line bombing targets. So I imagine they have a lot of bridging equipment with them. I mean, we were reporting earlier where there's this entire armed brigade that is on the ground ready to march. They just need an excuse. Either Russia is threatening Israel over Syria, or they're going to use those T-72 tanks or something. The only thing they're missing to start this war is a way to make it look like somehow this is Russia's fault.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're going to do something at the inauguration where they're going to say Russia has bombed our capital city or something horrendous like that, which would be a shame. There's a lot of good museums in Washington, D.C. I've never seen. I'd like to be able to go and look at those someday.
And, if you haven't picked up on the article, there was a very interesting interview that Mike put up today with several American and NATO generals who were giving a news conference, and what they said was that the U.S. is ready for war against Russia in Europe. And I say this because we are now being distracted by various U.S. agencies who are investigating the activities of other agencies regarding the investigations of the Clinton email scandal. Just like right before we were misdirected, conditized, with all the focus on the terrible death of Chandra Levy, a congressional aide to Gary Condit, right before 9/11, we are now getting Clintonized to distract our attention from a coming war with Russia. And everyone out there, please go pick up a few more things, a few more provisions. If you go to a big box store and have a membership, stuff that is going to store well, food, medication for yourself, the family, the pets, the whole enchilada.
And water, lots and lots and lots of water.
Yeah.
And a reminder, when you go to the market and you buy those big jugs of water, the plastic in those jugs is biodegradable. It will not last.
Yeah.
You need to actually go on out and buy special bottles to hold your, or tanks or bins or whatever, to hold your water.
Right.
And keep it safe, because the bottles that comes in from the market, they fall apart after just a couple of months.
Yeah. All right, I would like to now bop over to Asia and Myanmar.
Before you bop over, I want to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and so bop away.
Okay. This was an article out of Global Research, again, something we linked to that I find generally quite sober and well-researched and well thought out. And the question the article asks is the U.S. positioning itself for a military presence in Myanmar? And if you look at a map, Myanmar is very interestingly positioned and does border China on some of its border. And the article asks if the U.S. was using the Rohingya crisis as a pretext. Now, apparently, in terms of backstory, the governments of the U.S. and U.K. have spent decades and millions of dollars creating the political opposition fronts that constitute supports for Myanmar's new and first ever state councillor, Aung San Suu Kyi. This support includes backing Suu Kyi's saffron-clad street fronts, who make up a nationwide network of monk alliances and associations. And unfortunately, it is these alliances and associations that have served at the forefront of persecution against Myanmar's Rohingya Muslim minority. Also, for years, this violent persecution has unfolded in what could only be termed a media blackout across North America. How frequently do you hear about Myanmar's at CBS, NBC, Fox, etc.?
So far,
So
far you don't.
And when violence reaches fevered pitches, American and European media organizations intentionally introduce ambiguity as to precisely who is leading the violence. And what is that line about never letting a good crisis go to waste? So now the U.S. is expecting its military to go in as Advisors. Gee, where did I hear that term before?
Vietnam.
Yeah, I know. That was rhetorical there.
Yes.
For the Myanmar military against a horrifically persecuted minority group, the Muslim Rohingya, who many times literally get burned out of their shacks by the Myanmar military. You know, I never thought this lifetime looking at various wars blamed on religious differences, but was actually about access to resources, that I would ever have to say, watch out, here come the Buddhists. Unfortunately, Myanmar is the exception to that rule in big time. Yeah, you know. And bopping on over to Israel, the Israeli IDF has this tactic where they will go into Palestinian homes in the middle of the night, wake the family up, separate the kids, accuse them of having thrown stones or something in a demonstration. Many times the kids haven't. And what happens is these kids get brutalized by men in masks and told, if you ever go to a demonstration, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to kill you. And, you know, I have to tell you that this vicious intimidation of Palestinian kids by masked IDF members is an old stock in trade, and it must take a really manly man to punish innocent kids this way just for being Palestinians. I think it's disgusting.
It is disgusting.
Yeah.
And part of the problem, of course, is that the Israelis are indoctrinated to believe that anybody who is not Jewish isn't really a human being anyway.
Yep.
So it's not as surprising to see the Israelis treat the Palestinians the way the plantation owners in the antebellum South treated the slaves, who were also considered to not quite be human beings.
Yeah. And I think about these kids and the level of psychological pain and trauma that they go through just for being Palestinian kids when they really haven't done anything wrong.
Well, you should have been born Israeli then.
And we also need to take a look at Israel because the Israeli official who plotted to take down British MPs has resigned.
Oh, good.
The Israeli official who was caught on camera to take down British MPs has resigned from government service. Shai Massoud, a senior political officer at the embassy in London, resigned several days ago and was sent back to Israel. The UK Foreign Office and the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs both said that they regarded the matter as closed. However, the shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, has called on the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee to conduct an inquiry into the matter, saying it amounted to improper interference in our democratic politics by a foreign state. Boy, is she good at understatement. Massoud was filmed by an undercover reporter from Al Jazeera's television investigation units as he talked about taking down MPs he considered hostile to Israel, including Sir Alan Duncan, the former office minister. And Al Jazeera, good on you for this. But I do have a small caveat to the British House of Lords and House of Commons. Please don't think that the problem is gone because the symptom has been removed.
Temporarily here.
Temporarily.
I'm sure over in Israel they're saying, why are you complaining? The Americans let us do this all the time. What's wrong with you British people?
And anyone representing the Israeli government will be looking at attempting to do precisely the same thing that he was, only with a little more finesse. This is the way the Israeli establishment thinks, and the sooner the government of the UK gets it, the sooner they will be able to prevent its negative impact on the British government.
Or, for that matter, the American government, or the Canadian government, or the Austrian government, or the German government, or so forth and so on.
Yes. And I'd like to bop over now to Korea, specifically North Korea. Apparently China and Russia have agreed on more countermeasures against U.S. anti-missile system, and this is reported at Xinhua. China and Russia have agreed to take further unspecified measures in response to a U.S. plan to deploy an anti-missile system in South Korea, state news agency reported today. They will be aimed at safeguarding interests of China and Russia and the strategic balance in the region. Yada, yada, yada. And apparently China and Russia held a joint anti-missile drill last May after Washington and Seoul began discussions over installing the U.S. Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, THAAD, to counter any North Korean threats. Now, THAAD is due to be employed on a South Korean golf course. unsettling Moscow and Beijing, which worry that the system's powerful radar will compromise their security and do nothing to lower tensions on the Korean peninsula. And you're hearing sighs from me and hair-tearing out noises. What the U.S. government right now should be doing is working with China and Russia to get North Korea back to the negotiating table to create a peace treaty which gives North Korea assurances on trade in exchange for them stopping their nuclear weapons program. Mike, that appears to be logical.
Well, logical is one thing.
Yeah.
Politically expedient, of course, is something else entirely. And, there's a lot of saber-rattling going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But I wish someone in Foggy Bottom would get the notion, and this is going to be interesting after President Obama dissed China on his visit to China for the G20 in September and accused them of doing bad things in the South China Sea. But somehow China has to be brought back into the process to convince North Korea to come together and so that a peace treaty can be created with the quid pro quo that they'd stop their nuclear weapons program if they got that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, we're in an area where our government and the corporate media are shouting all of these accusations and allegations without any proof.
Yeah.
And then they stand there and say, if you are a loyal citizen, you will just believe us. You will not question. You will think what we tell you to think.
Nope,
you will believe what we
anymore.
tell you to believe.
Not anymore. We can't. We can't afford to for the future of this nation and where it may be going.
Or the future of the planet.
Yeah,
I mean, we're talking about serious risk of mushroom clouds all over the place.
Yep.
If every nuclear weapon possessed by the United States and by Russia were to be detonated at their nominal yields, we're looking at a real-life version of On the Beach. There'll be enough radiation in the atmosphere to kill off all life on Earth. That's how serious this gets.
Right, right.
Okay, before I let you go to your next story here, a little bit of an update on this thing about the District of Columbia National Guard commander.
Yes.
Apparently, the chief of the District of Columbia's Guard reports directly to the president. This general of the Washington, D.C. National Guard is a presidential appointee, which means the order to let him go had to come from President Obama.
Okay, all right. And there is no mention of any kind of replacement. Those people are going to be on the ground blind.
Well, you know what is probably going to happen is they're going to try and kick up a ruckus in the streets, and they're going to blame it on Donald Trump because, after all, he's in charge right now. If anybody from Donald Trump's campaign is listening to me, and I'm pretty sure some of you are.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Trump needs to have a new commander of the National Guard ready to plug in at 12:02 on Inauguration Day.
Right,
to be able to walk on in there and say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to handle the rioting.
Yeah, exactly. Over to another embarrassment for the United States, as though it needs any more embarrassments.
There have been so many.
There was a leaked tape where John Kerry was heard to say that the U.S. watched ISIS rise in Syria and hoped to manage it.
Well, that didn't work out too well, did it?
Not too well.
Yeah.
And, but...
Yeah, we're going to start an avalanche here and hope that we can surf it down to the bottom.
And he made the observation, Nusra makes it hard, he said, referring to Jabhat al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. Nusra and Daesh, ISIS, both make it hard because you have this extreme element out there, and unfortunately some of the opposition has kind of chosen to work with him. Really? Secretary of State? This is absolutely unbelievable to me. That the U.S. government allowed ISIS to grow to destabilize the Syrian government, believing it would push al-Assad to the negotiating table and then he would resign. But al-Assad called for Russian help, which has been the major factor in getting most of the jihadists out of Syria successfully.
I want to make a comment here, and I've made it before. Okay. We have seen over the last, going on 20 years, an absolutely botched up foreign policy nightmare
Yeah.
Goof after goof after goof after goof. All of it because if anybody is doing an actual careful long-term analysis of the consequences of any of these actions, they're being ignored.
Yeah.
We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to grab a couple more phone calls here. James in Tokyo, Ohio gozaimasu. What's on your mind?
Ohio gozaimasu, Michael. First, I take exception to the guy who was talking about your sex appeal. I think you have great sex appeal. It's one of the only reasons I listen to you.
God bless you.
Oh, you smoothie. You smoothie. You're going to turn my head.
For me, and you have that lovely harp angel.
Yes, that part I'll agree with. That part I will agree with here. So what's on your mind?
Talking about, sex appeal. Talking about sex. Well, I want to talk about Russia, but first, talking about sex appeal, I saw that Twitter thing that Madonna did of her vagina showing the tattoo or hair, I don't know, but the Nike logo, just do it for the Million Women March.
Oh.
And I have no problem with anyone. I have no problem with anyone saying whatever they want on Twitter and showing, if they're an adult, pictures of themselves. But what I didn't like about it was the picture looked like someone in their 20s, and that, sir, was fake news.
Yeah, that definitely is going to be fake news. I mean,
yes, definitely.
The funny thing is, many years ago, in fact, when I was working on the Stargate film, the company I was working at was up in this little house in the Hollywood Hills, and we overlooked Madonna's place. And she used to walk around there naked all the time, and back then that was something pleasant to look at. But today, I don't think so.
I don't either, and, however, if it wasn't fake news, she might have got my vote. But anyway, Michael, Russia, it really frustrates me, all the stuff going on in Russia. And one of the things that frustrates me most is when a lot of people keep saying Russia was invaded. Russia was invaded. Every news outlet from Bloomberg and everybody.
You're talking about Crimea. Crimea was invaded.
Crimea was invaded. And I got in a little tip with some internet hack, Catherine Hughes, and I said, it wasn't invaded. 95% of the people voted for it. And she says, oh, that's because there were people in black masks forcing them to, or they disappeared. And I'm like, not 95% of ethnic Russians they didn't force.
Yeah.
The UN had different surveys for decades, and they asked the people what they want to do, and they said, yeah, we all like to, and it was always about 95%. You wanted to return to Crimea. To
Russia. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again,
Russian. She had one point though. She said, "Well, the Russians they forced people into Crimea, and so it was an invasion." And that's the only small point she had, because after World War II, they kicked out a lot of the Crimean Tartars, but I mentioned, this place was ruled by Mongols, and they were kicked out by Romans, who were kicked out by Greeks, and, the whole thing went on and on and on. So, I thought it was very legitimate referendum. Legal under
it was legal. It was legal under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Basically, the attitude of the United States of America is, we don't care what the people of Crimea want. We refuse to recognize the vote. Therefore, if they're part of Russia, by default, it's annexation. That's their circuitous logic to get from a free election by the people of Crimea to Russia stole that. And they're staying with the story. And because right now the corporate media is in a panic about hanging on to what little remains of their credibility, you're going to get people like this who are going to say, oh, well, they had people in black, they were threatening them, they were doing this. And the proper response to that every time should be, show me your proof. Show me your proof that Russia had people in black out there threatening to kill the Crimeans. Where's your proof on that? And when they say, well, it was reported by, just say, no, I'm not interested in another report from another corporate media liar. Show me video or photos, and otherwise just shut the heck up.
It bugs me, but I remember when Kosovo wanted their independence from Serbia, and Serbia, they didn't approve it, that they can do that. And the U.S. did everything they could militarily to get Kosovo away. And
they wanted those Trepka mines
to make the
They wanted those Trepka.
It just bugs me, that's all.
Well, it should bug you. I mean, this is supposed to be the 21st century, and we're supposed to have outgrown this idea of walking into other people's countries and bashing their skulls in order to steal their natural resources. But it does seem like we're into a new dark ages where this is now the accepted interaction between nations. Anyway, James, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. More calls when we come on back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And courtesy the Washington Post, we're getting a little more clarification on this thing about the commanding general of the Washington, D.C. National Guard. And apparently a part of it is that pro forma presidential appointees, when a new president is coming in, will submit a letter of resignation to basically say, I am going to leave and you can do whatever you want to do. Now, sometimes those letters of resignation are rejected. But in this case, the Trump administration accepted the resignation, and this general plans to retire from the Army at this point anyway. And apparently the Trump transition team has picked out a new commander for the Washington, D.C. National Guard, who is basically taking over just as Donald Trump is sworn in. So the timing is a little upsetting to a lot of people, as is the timing that Trump has ordered all U.S. foreign diplomats to step down from their positions on Inauguration Day. So apparently Trump is definitely trying to establish a big black line between Obama and Trump. And in the context of this revelation, then I'm a little bit less concerned about this. This is more about posturing and politics, although we are still hearing from all those snowflakes and buttercups and has-been celebrities that they're going to go on out there and cause a ruckus. And like I said, we're going to keep an eye on the weather forecast because if the weather continues the way it's going, there's a chance that we could see Washington, D.C. Get hit with a lot of snow, and that would just calm everybody down. We're going to take 2 more phone calls, then we're going to go back to the Lady Claire. Dennis in Lansing, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good evening, Michael and Claire.
Good evening to you.
I'm a blast from the past. I called a lot 2010, 2011. I was taking care of an elderly parent.
Okay.
And I am a fellow music minister, Claire.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
And we had some very nice conversations way back when.
Okay.
And I suffered a mini stroke and some reversals, and it's been a long journey, but I've been staying in touch with the show, and now I have a phone that has minutes on it. So I can call in.
Okay.
What I wanted to talk about is in that movie Money as Debt 3, he has quite a few films out.
Yes, he does.
Paul Grignon. And his Money as Debt 3 is his latest, hour or so feature. And I was watching it. I've watched it maybe 3 times, and it's finally sinking in. He's talking about self-issued credit based on the value of our labor. That we can actually do this. We could do it through internet exchanges, or you can do it directly. And I personally experienced this recently when a friend of mine for Christmas, he gave me this envelope, and in it was a unique coupon for a local Italian food place where it was an unconditional, no expiration date, free dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Probably worth maybe $6-7. And I used to be a drinker, and I can relate to people who are dealing with addiction, and I could take that coupon. I live a block away from a little local liquor store. I could take the coupon over there and trade it for, $1.50 so I can buy myself a beer.
Yes.
And they can in turn take that same thing and trade it with somebody else for something else, and so on and so forth until somebody redeems it at the Italian place, and then it's no longer in circulation, but that becomes money. self-issued.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Currency can be whatever any two individuals or a group agree represents a medium of exchange. And it's interesting you're talking about that ticket from the Italian restaurant, because back during the Depression of the 1930s, there was this story about this small kind of isolated town where they were really having trouble with the official U.S. currency and the banker debt and everything. And there was a newspaper. And they needed to get paper and ink and other supplies to get their newspaper out. So they went down to the paper supply place and the ink supply place, and they had printed up these little tickets, good for free advertising. And they said, we'll give you this, you give us some materials, we'll get the newspaper out, and when you cash that in, we'll give you a free ad. And people started doing exactly the same thing. They would take these tickets for free advertising, and they would pass from hand to hand to hand to hand to hand. And it reached a point where the town's population had more confidence and trust in those advertising vouchers than in the Federal Reserve notes. And so what you're describing has happened many, many times throughout history. And interestingly enough, when Hitler was doing his German economic miracle and issued his own currency, it was actually denominated as a unit of labor. And it just, Germany's economy lit on up. They called it the German miracle, and that, of course, is why all the nations that were still enslaved to private central banks had to gin up a reason to go to war against him.
Had to put a stop to that.
Oh, absolutely. Same reason they wanted to destroy the young United States, same reason they almost came into the Civil War on the side of the Confederacy. How dare you just make your own money? You're only allowed to borrow money from the bankers at interest. Where do you get it? Well, we just print it up. Why can't I print up my own money? You're not allowed to. Bad things will happen to you. Okay?
Right. Well, I'm getting ready to print up and put it on my website affidavits for free introductory lessons. I teach private music lessons.
Okay.
And I'm going to put that up, and they're going to be worth anywhere from $15 to $26. And again, people could just print up as much as they want, and they could trade it with each other, and it could be like a form of money, a form of debt-free money, because it has value once it gets redeemed with me.
As long as it is redeemable in the end, the system will work. Where it breaks down is like with the Federal Reserve. They overprinted those paper certificates, which they weren't supposed to do under Bretton Woods. Anyway, Dennis, good to hear from you again. We're running out of time, and I need to let you go. We're going to take another phone call and then close the lines for the rest of the show so Claire can have her time on the microphone. Bob in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Hi, Claire. Hope you guys are well.
Working on it.
Yep.
Okay. Mike, thank you for the Manuka honey recommendation. It's really worked wonders, so thank you so much.
Good.
Mike, I got in a little late on the show, and I don't know if this was discussed, but what happened in Syria yesterday with the Israeli attack on that compound in Damascus, I had thought that the Syrian airspace, with the help of the Russians, was sealed with the S-300s, S-400s, etc. So I was a little surprised to see that they were able to penetrate Syrian airspace. So I don't know if that was discussed. Well,
the original, let me give you a clarification because we did cover this earlier in the show. The original report was Israel had carried out airstrikes. As it turned out, they had used missiles launched from somewhere around the Sea of Galilee. They could have been low-level cruise missiles or something, but whatever it is, they did succeed in penetrating the space, and I'm sure both Syria and Russia are moving resources to be able to cover that again. But there's no question it's an outright provocation, and I think one of the possible motives is to try and goad Russia into doing something that could be portrayed as a direct threat to Israel, and then, of course, they launch that invasion force in Poland into Russia.
Yeah. My last point, and then before I ask you this one last question, I want to praise Claire for she always seems to bring up what's happening in Yemen. She's one of the few people that does this, so thank you. You know, it says a lot about you as a person. You bring up this very sad story.
Yes, you're
regarding,
welcome.
I had a temporary brain cramp last night, and I watched the first few minutes of O'Reilly. And his talking points, he was condemning this whole P-Gate story. But then he had Lindsey Graham on, little Lindsey, and he said to him, Lindsey Graham said, yeah, the Russians gave this story to this British MI6 guy, and O'Reilly said, just, accepting it, like, yeah, of course they did. While 2 minutes earlier he was condemning the corporate media for going with this story with no evidence. He just agreed with Lindsey Graham. I mean, do we have evidence that this was given by the Russians to this British PR guy?
Well, there's no evidence whatsoever, and what's really interesting is this former it's probably still current MI6 agent, Christopher Steele, is now acknowledging he was being paid to produce this dossier, and what's really bizarre about the story is originally he was being paid by a Republican, he won't say who, and then all of a sudden it changed to a Democrat was coming on in and making the payments on the manufacture of this story. And the only substantiation Steele has for any of it is another spy has stood up to say, oh, yes, Christopher wouldn't lie to you. These are spies. It's not exactly the benchmark of moral, ethical, honest people that we're dealing with here.
So he could have just made up the story and not gotten it from a Russian, whatever, an FSB guy in Moscow.
Well, the actual story of the events in the hotel room actually began as a piece of fan fiction by somebody who hates Donald Trump and just wrote this up as, this sort of fantasy misadventure. This is what Donald Trump's like. And it got grabbed and propaganda laundered through this MI6 guy. And then, of course, John McCain was the ultimate propaganda laundry because he handed it to the intelligence agencies. It went from there to the media. Most of the media didn't want to deal with it. Then BuzzFeed ran with it. And the rest of the media said, okay, BuzzFeed has opened the gates. We can go with this. And now they're all hugely humiliated, pointing fingers at each other, and out there screaming, no, we're the real media. You can trust us. We made a mistake, only one, but those people on the Internet, they're all kooks and tinfoil hat wearing wacko conspiracy theorists, and you should never listen to anything that they're saying. They're actually adding curriculum to the public schools in California to teach kids from an early age, you will believe what the government tells you, you will believe what the corporate media tells you, you will not believe anything independent media tells you because they're not approved of by the government.
Well, I'm glad I left California, and I'm glad at this point I don't have any kids, because if I had kids growing up going through these public schools, I think it would just, I had to send them to private schools. I couldn't.
I agree. If I was fortunate enough to be a parent, I would have my kid in private school. Actually, what am I kidding? At my age, if I'd had a kid, they would have graduated college by now. But it really is very ugly out there. And, of course, all of this is a violation of the First Amendment. But we have a government that has declared war on the American people and on the Bill of Rights.
But, Mike, I'm worried about Trump's fate once he becomes president. But I don't think if they want to take him out, I don't think it's going to be via the JFK route. I think it'll be through this phony intelligence and maybe potentially an impeachment. I think that's more likely than just going out and assassinating him and putting it on some lone, like in Paul Craig Roberts' view, some right-wing nut who resents the fact that Trump is quote unquote a stooge of Russia. That they might do that, but he thinks too that it might be it's going to be based on this phony intelligence.
Well, that's it exactly, and I think the American people are going to demand a high standard of proof before Congress tries to remove the President of the United States of America. And if they try, they could trigger a civil war or an outright bloody revolution. And I'd like to avoid those outcomes. But on the other hand, we cannot just let an entrenched oligarchical establishment just roll over the American people, roll over the Constitution. We dare not leave our children to suffer under this current system. No responsible parent could ever even consider allowing their children to grow up under a government that just lies to them, takes their money, sends them out to die in wars of conquest, and is a functionally a dictatorship with pretensions and illusions of democracy being not too carefully maintained. But we've reached basically a crossroads here, and we're going to have to make some very hard choices if they try and take Trump out of the White House.
All right, well, you guys have a great weekend. Thank you.
You too, and thanks for the call.
All right, thank you very much. Do you have a short story here?
Yes, I do. Looking That's the clock.
About 3 minutes.
Yeah. U.S. forces massacred Afghan civilians in self-defense. In early November...
They waved a rug at me. They waved a rug at me.
Yeah, right. In early November, there was an incident in northern Kunduz province of Afghanistan that resulted in the death of 33 Afghan civilians. And a Pentagon military investigation concluded in a new report today. The troops ordered the airstrike against the village of Baz, and the bombings killed large numbers of civilians within. Now, this report was very quick to shrug off civilian casualties, insisting that the troops had acted in self-defense and that they were clearing the troops of any wrongdoing for calling in the airstrikes against civilian homes within a village, presenting it as an appropriate response.
What exactly was the threat that was presented to these soldiers?
Here you go. I mean, this is so vague and so vacuous. The investigation centered its justification on claims that Taliban forces had fired on troops and might have, well, been within any given house in the village, concluding that the bombing of all the houses was the minimum force required to neutralize various threats they might conceivably have been under.
Okay.
So, Mike,
back in Vietnam days, we had to destroy that village to save it.
So now slaughter and assassination of innocent non-combatants is defined by the U.S. military as self-defense? I mean, come on. What this reminds me of is the response of the papal legate during the Catholic Church's genocide against the French Cathars. When apprised that there were women and children with the men at Montségur, he responded, "Kill them all. God will find his own." I don't think this should have gone down this way at all.
Well, I don't either.
Yeah.
And in a just world, you might want to talk to your imaginary playmate up there about this. All of these people ought to be hauled before The Hague. They need war crimes trials. Unfortunately, we've seen the U.S. government go way beyond what the Nazis were doing. I mean, even the Nazis had certain limits.
Yeah.
You know, and our government seems to think it's all open season. Kill men, women, and children, torture people to death to find weapons of mass destruction that don't exist.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our Kaahumanu Friday show after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our Kaahumanu Friday program on Friday the 13th here. And Claire, take it away.
Okay. In his...
Sorry
about that. I love you, but please don't do that. In his testimony to the Senate the other day, Rex Tillerson, who is Trump's pick for Secretary of State, wants to provide Saudi Arabia with more help to bomb Yemen. Now, for 21 months, a coalition of nations led by Saudi Arabia has been relentlessly bombing Yemen, using U.S. and UK-produced weapons and intelligence in a war that has devastated the country and killed well over 10,000 Yemeni people.
Well, because once the U.S. government conquers a country and imposes a puppet ruler, you will love your puppet ruler. How dare you try and take your country back from the American empire? Hail Caesar!
There is abundant evidence that the high civilian death toll in Yemen is the result of deliberate, not accidental airstrikes by Saudi Arabia. During its campaign, Saudi Arabia has bombed endless civilian targets, including homes, farms, markets, factories, water infrastructure, hospitals, and children's schools, and has even gone so far as to use banned cluster weapons, which are designed to inflict damage over a wide area and often remain lethal for years after being dropped. They're also a tremendous attractant to little toddlers because they look so much, and I think they're engineered to look like food packages, and will literally tear a toddler limb from limb.
Cynthia McKinney raised a big stink about that when she was still in Congress, which is one of the reasons she's no longer in Congress.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I do have a response to this, and that is Rex. I am having an industrial strength. Palm to forehead moment.
But let us all remember that all of Trump's nominees are before Congress to be confirmed.
I know.
And we have to hold open the reality that they are telling Congress what they believe Congress wants to hear in order to win that confirmation.
I know.
And it may not actually reflect what their own policies are. And it certainly is going to have no bearing on the fact that once he is in office, policies regarding Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and so forth will be set by President Donald Trump.
Right, right. But it's very, to me, what's very annoying, Mike, is what Congress wants to hear. And apparently they want to hear that the U.S.'s complicity with this slaughter of people in Yemen is perfectly fine. And it's not fine to me. It's not fine that children are starving to death. And I posted some very graphic images of kids who have been killed and are dying slow, painful deaths from malnutrition because of the Saudi blocking of the Yemen harbor. They can't get food
what
in.
Congress wants to hear is more war, and more money into these military contractors whose stock lines these Congress critters' portfolios.
Yeah.
That's what Congress wants to hear.
Yeah.
That they are going to be made richer off of all this bloodshed, and their thought process stop at the end of richer.
Yeah,
we will make you richer. Okay, fine, you're confirmed. All right, there's the music. Time for us to get out of here for the weekend. Remember, you Rivero's Rangers are now all part of the independent media. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone you know, go gentle, don't trigger those defensive reflexes. We'll be back on Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Have a good weekend. Aloha, America.